Man dies in Niagara emergency room. Trudeau can't bring himself to call what is happening in Gaza a genocide. The UN warns of possible war escalation between Hezbollah and Israel. And the Pentagon ran an anti-vax campaign in the Philippines to undermine China's growing influence. Good morning. It's Monday, June 17th. I'm Nora. Here are your headlines. A man who went to a Niagara area emergency room to have an infection treated ended up dead the next day. Speaking to CBC's Samantha Beattie and Ethan Lang, Anne-Marie Zamet blamed the broken healthcare system for her father, John's death. She said that when she left him in the ER, his vitals had been stable, and the hospital staff said that they would conduct more tests the following day. While Anne-Marie says she didn't know the exact cause of her father's death, she said that he was kept in the ER for multiple days because there were no beds in other departments for him to be moved to, and that it was clear that the hospital was stretched for resources. She told CBC this, quote, "I felt like we were in some sort of field hospital in the middle of a war. They have no ability to call for the nurse. They just have to yell," unquote. She is one of many people who shared their experiences at a public hearing by the Ontario Health Coalition. The group, which advocates for public health care in the province, has been collecting experiences from people in rural communities in Ontario in hopes of putting together a report that will pressure the Ford government into reconsidering its privatization policies. Next, in a summit aimed at finding a solution to the war in Ukraine, Justin Trudeau made comments about Russia needing to be held accountable for its actions throughout the war, which he said included, quote, "an element of genocide," unquote. He made specific reference to Russia's kidnapping and forcible transfer of Ukrainian children, which the UN reported on earlier this year. Trudeau was co-chairing a portion of the summit that dealt with the quote-unquote human dimension of the war, which talks about prisoners of war, civilian prisoners, and deported children. When reporters asked the Prime Minister about Israel's actions in Gaza, he refused to use the same terminology. Instead, he said this, quote, "We are continuing to follow the international institutions that we have. We continue to watch the work with the International Criminal Court and the ICJ. Canada supports international law, and we always will," unquote. Meanwhile, Chilean President Gabriel Boric was able to draw a clear parallel between both situations, saying in his opening remarks this, quote, "We strongly believe that this situation represents a serious violation of international law and human rights. The same principles, we must say, that are being disregarded by the Israeli government in Gaza," unquote. Let's stay with international news and talk about the UN and Lebanon. UN officials are warning that there is a threat of quote-unquote miscalculation leading to a war escalation between Hezbollah and Israel in Lebanon. The warning comes after recent escalations and clashes along Lebanon's southern border. It came from Jeannie Hennis-Pleshart, the UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon, and Ardolo Lazzaro, the head of UN peacekeeping forces in Lebanon. They said they were, quote unquote, deeply concerned about these recent clashes and that the, quote, danger of miscalculation leading to a sudden and wider conflict is very real, unquote. They called on, quote, all actors to cease their fire and commit to working towards a political and diplomatic solution, unquote. I'll pause here. Imagine that was the language we were using around Russia. Wouldn't have been different? Wouldn't that have been different? What's so different there? Okay, anyway, you know what's different. I'll leave it there. This also comes as far-right members of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet have been increasingly calling for an all-out invasion and war with Lebanon, while the US and France have been working on a diplomatic solution to try and diffuse tensions. And finally, a Reuters investigation has shown that the Pentagon ran a secret anti-vax campaign during the height of the pandemic to undermine China's influence. The reporting shows that the U.S. targeted social media audiences in the Philippines specifically to curb China's influence there. The campaign involved creating hundreds of social media accounts that tried to sow doubt about China's COVID-19 vaccine, Sinovac, and to question the quality of other materials coming out of China, such as face masks and test kits. The campaign was also expanded beyond Southeast Asia to include audiences in the Middle East. According to the Reuters story, the campaign started under the Trump administration and continued months into the Biden administration until it was shut down in mid-2021. Those are your headlines for Monday, June 17th. I'm Nora. You're listening to this podcast at sandynora.com, on the Real News Network podcast feed, and anywhere you get your podcasts. I hope you have a wonderful Monday, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.